Welcome to the Ask a Business Expert podcast. My name is Gordon Sheppard, and I'm really glad that you could join us here today, especially because we are interviewing Zeshaan Adatia. Now, Zeshaan is a private investigator, and he just has so much to give in terms of knowledge that you might need to have in case something funny is going on in the place where you work. And we're lucky because Zeshaan actually wrote a great article for the Ask a Business Expert website, and it's called, How Can I Prevent Employee Fraud? And within that article, he produced a 10-step checklist, and it's called 10 Steps to Help You Conduct an Effective Corporate Investigation. And that's what we're going through in the interview here today. We're going to go through each step. Zeshaan's going to give his insights at each step. And if you ever needed to conduct a corporate investigation in your workplace, you're going to be in a really good position after listening to this interview to actually do it the right way. And with that in mind, I'm not going to hold you back any longer. Here's the interview with Zeshaan. Zeshaan, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Gordon. It's great to be here.
You know, what was also really great, so great for the Ask a Business Expert audience, was the fact that you actually wrote an article called How Can I Prevent Employee Fraud? And you are an experienced private investigator. So that combo, goes together really, really well. And your knowledge came through obviously in spades. I know I learned a ton from sort of getting a chance to work with you on the article itself. And I know our audience is getting a lot out of it as well. But for the people that want to watch, they're going to get to sort of see you in action here today on this video presentation. And before we get started, if you had to introduce yourself at a party, what would you say?
I'm a private investigator and detective, which basically means that I'm able to come into a company. I specialize in corporate investigations, and I'm able to go into that company and find out that if there's anything ongoing or prevent any sort of potential incidents from happening. We may go in and review policies and procedures and everything you can imagine under the sun, from employee fraud to even just employee time theft. We investigate all sorts of cases, review those policies and procedures all the way from the board of directors right down to the security staff, so that everyone gets a great scope of what we do working with IT and human resources.
Well, I guarantee you the people that are, watching this right now, they know, if they're soft in certain areas, right? And what we're going to see, I think, coming out again from your experience is how thorough your approach is from your specialization in the way, you go at this in kind of the right way, which makes total sense. And we're going to dig into, again, a checklist that you created for us, right? 10-step checklist, and that's going to be great. But before we even do that one, let's take a second and get your definition of what employee fraud actually is.
Yeah, so thanks, Gordon. Employee fraud is a wide term that encompasses all types of actions that an employee can take that really exposes the company to third parties. Everything such as theft of proprietary information. We commonly handle cases where the staff that have access to information may steal that information to gain an edge in the industry. For example, we've had a case in the past where we had a individual. We were just conducting a background check, and the corporation found out that the individual had access to trade secrets. And as soon as we completed the background check and found out that they had been charged in another country for criminal theft of trade secrets, and they were actually sent by another company. So we were able to bring in digital forensics and expose those crimes and interview the guilty parties. In the end, all the policies were changed surrounding hiring, training, and auditing the staff. So we'll come in and do, full assessments on employee fraud, and that I feel that gives a great assessment of what employee fraud encompasses.
Well, and we know from, again, the article research that you did that employee fraud costs billions and billions of dollars, certainly across North America in terms of what it is. And we can hear in this case, a business owner doesn't even know they're exposed. They then gets to start to work with you, and we find out that when an employee does an illegal action, again, with their company, you've got a chance to, help sort of assess that or get something done about it. And then you've also been so good with, again, your knowledge sharing around helping organizations to prevent it. So the person that's watching this video right now, they're a CEO, they're maybe an HR manager or somebody that, is suspicious of some activity in their area. Maybe they're from the IT department in their company as well. They're looking for ways to kind of dig into this and know, do we need a private investigator in this situation or do we not? And I think from this, we're going to learn from, again, your sort of, again, defining and your experience, whether or not they can kind of make that call. You called it in the article, the 10 steps to help you conduct an effective corporate investigation. And step number 1 was qualify the investigation. When you wrote that step, what did you want people to understand?
Really that private investigators may not be able to take on a case. We may discover almost immediately that there's criminal activity afoot, and we may have to report that. So qualifying the investigation, we put that through sort of a checklist of items that we have to make sure that we're not involved in any conflicts in the investigation, that the evidence can remain admissible if questioned, and that we're an impartial third party to the entire investigation.
Well, this makes sense, and that's the ethical approach, right? You're not going to take on work that isn't in your area of expertise, but immediately you'll be able to help them refer to the right authority, in a sense, given the type of situation. But in the meantime, if you did actually qualify the investigation and it was sort of a green light in your opinion, you're moving on to step number 2. And step number 2 is to plan and prepare for the investigation. Why is that step important, and what can people do to follow that one?
Well, planning and preparing in an investigation is one of the crucial steps. So without those steps, we find that investigators will deviate from the actual procedure from an investigation. So that may make the evidence no longer admissible in court. And it may be in some cases that 10 or 15 years later, the courts may ask for what's called a chain of custody. And we're able to document and provide that right from the planning stage, that what did we find and how did we plan and take action from the beginning.
The chain of custody. More things I don't know if I wanted to know in my life, but thank goodness there are people like you who actually know what that means and why that's important. And again, I think around these types of areas, these gray areas, I've dealt with clients who have an acceptable level of, things that you've identified, time theft and these kind of things. They actually tolerate a certain amount of it, but I don't know that they've ever dug in to truly understand how impactful that is and ultimately how it hurts their brand in the end and will affect their customers overall. But we're talking now about you being able to come in, do it right, and actually document in the right way so that the evidence that's gathered, for example, can last a lifetime in terms of what the company will need in the future, which gets us into step number 3. And that's when you're gathering the evidence. What happens in this step?
Well, gathering the evidence is important from a legal standpoint, that a professional is hired to collect that evidence. Now, when we gather evidence, we check many sources that the client may not suspect in the beginning. And when we come in, we've seen time and time again where to check, and we'll also check those areas that even we don't check very often, and we may not discover any evidence that pertaining to the case. But it's always best to have that professional come in, and they know exactly what areas they're looking in based on the evidence they're provided with.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Again, we're hearing by working with a private investigator who's got good experience, someone like yourself, you're actually not going to leave any stone unturned, right? You're going through this in a very thorough manner, and you're making sure that everything is covered off. Step number 4, finalize an investigation plan. I thought we already did the plan a couple steps ago. What do you mean by finalize the investigation plan?
Yeah, so at this point, you've set out the plan, you've gathered some evidence, and it may be that you've gathered some evidence in an area where the plan may change. So now we may want to target different areas based on the evidence that we've gathered so far. So throughout the investigation, not just in this at this stage, we would want to always be assessing and ensuring that we're taking the investigation down the right path that it needs to go. Not taking away from the very few facts that come up in areas that aren't often convicted, but we will assess every area prior to continuing.
Well, and something I've learned from you in the article is that investigations are fluid, right? There are things that come up, things you might discover 3/4, 90% of the way down the process that really have to be considered. And again, from your approach, you're making sure that that occurs, right? So that gets us into step 5. You're going to consult with all concerned parties. What does that mean?
Absolutely. So it may concern all parties. For example, we've dealt with investigations in the past where it may concern HR departments, IT, the board of directors, all the way down to the managers who are training the staff. Procedures like audit procedures do involve everyone and affect everyone, like evacuation procedures. So in cases like that, evacuation procedures may be different for each department. So depending on who it's affecting, we need to assess everyone and consult with all the parties. Not only that, but we may need to consult with legal parties and to check and make sure that we're following the correct regulations and that everything is in place correctly before we move on.
Well, and I'll bet you when you meet people up front, they're not comfortable, right? So they don't, they're like, well, can we get this over with? And I'm sure they might be tempted to rush in a sense. And in the meantime, what you're going to say is, no, professionally, we're going to make sure that everybody concerned is connected to, we're contacting them, we're getting the information that we need to make the investigation as thorough as possible. Makes a ton of sense to me. Step number 6, interviews and interrogations. This is just like TV, right? You come in, it's like first 48 and all that kind of stuff, super dramatic.
Well, sometimes it can be, but for the most part, we do interviews and interrogations in the proper sense that the interviewee feels comfortable, and we do that in a setting so that we get a comfortable situation and responses to the questions that we're asking. Interviewing and interrogations can be a dangerous portion of the job. There are cases in the past where there's been theft or heated exchanges, and we always separate the interviews and interrogations. And the main difference between an interview and an interrogation would be an interview is more subtle and like a softer approach, and an interrogation would be the guilty party is likely already knows about the investigation, and you need to get that sort of information out of them, and they know they're being interrogated. Yeah.
Tell me about body language. I mean, you're trained in this area. Give me an example of body language and some things that you see then, or techniques that you're helping to kind of get to the truth with.
Absolutely. So commonly, kinesiology is used for investigator training when being trained for interviews and interrogations. And there are common tricks that it's not for everyone, but looking up and to the right may show signs of deception, or up and to the left may show signs of truthfulness. But it may be on a case-by-case basis. So during the interview and interrogation process, we may start by laying a sort of baseline questions and just gaining the trust of the individual and laying those facts so we can find out what they look like when they're telling the truth. What does their body language show when they're telling the truth? And that's our baseline. And then when we go from there, we're able to assess what does deception look like, what body language is showing and when they're showing deception. And so we'll be able to assess very quickly. And sometimes it takes more than one interview, but the experienced investigators know exactly what they're looking for.
Wow, I'm going to be looking down into the center at my notes. I'm not sure what that indicates in this interview, but there you go. I really appreciate, again, folks, they wouldn't know this, but you're trained, again, in this area to help, again, trying to use these techniques to get to the real things that are going on. Number 7, evaluate breaches and assess credibility. Why is that step number 7?
Yeah, so we keep that there because as soon as we've assessed that a breach has occurred, we need to find out what needs to change so that this doesn't happen again. Everything from prevention to after an incident has occurred, we'll assess at this point. That way, when we present our report to the client, they can find in the summary exactly what they need to do to make those changes. And when we're talking about those items in the summary, it's very easy for any client to identify the regulation changes that need to happen, and our connections with those regulatory bodies gets that quick information, so you don't need to pay for those government bodies to visit and audit your center. We provide those services for you.
Well, let's just bring this to life with an example. So you've talked about regulatory. So in a corporate investigation, because you're looking at paperwork, you're looking at policies, procedures. And when we talk about a breach, there literally, I think what you're saying then is, for example, there might be something in a policy or a procedure that maybe opens up a gap for deception that somebody could commit an employee fraud act. Is that where you're going?
Absolutely, yes. So even during the hiring process, an employee may be exposed to these policies and procedures that they may have to sign off for. And in that policy and procedure, they may find some way to expose themselves to a situation where they can take advantage of that situation. So right away, we could identify that there's a breach in the hiring policy itself. And then after retraining and recreating that policy, we can effectively eliminate that situation from happening.
Well, and I love putting experts together. So it's fun. I wish we had an HR expert here right now, because they would say, well, I've got that covered. But you would then say, no, wait a second. Under our scrutiny, with our experience, here's some things that you might want to keep in mind as you then really kind of make it watertight so that the company is never exposed to that type of breach again. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, super. I'm just, again, it's so fun for me chatting with you because I keep learning, and I really appreciated that. Step number 8, pretty simple, follow-up. Why is step number 8 so important?
So we follow up with basically every department here. Following up is important because we may have missed something. There may be a key piece of evidence that has been overlooked at this point. Following up with every department is important. They may have uncovered some information that they weren't prepared to come forward with in the past. There may have been, during the investigation, a policy or procedure change or an avenue for another employee to report this information anonymously. So during an investigation, it's common that we employ these tactics for individuals to come forward anonymously. And that may not happen until towards the end of the investigation. So we'll follow up with every department to make sure no information is missed.
I really appreciate this because I think it's it's allowing the natural flow of human nature in this situation to happen. So if I just hired you to come in and do the investigation, I'd be like, go talk to everybody, get all the information now, we'll all get it done. But they're going to actually kind of want to feel you out in a sense, or know if they're going to get in trouble, or like you said, is there a way to sort of report anonymously or get the information out that you're needing? And you're actually laying the groundwork for that to happen throughout the investigation so that, again, you've been as thorough as possible. I think that just really, again, holds up the work that you do, but also, again, makes it as thorough as possible for the corporation to make sure this is done right. Step number 9, reporting. Why is this such an important step?
Well, reporting is crucial, especially from a legal standpoint for admissibility. If the company wants to lay charges against the individual because some criminal action has taken place, the report is going to be critical for the legal staff to quickly identify what has happened during the entire investigation and during the incident that occurred. Legal teams, they charge more than we do. So you're going to want us to come in ahead of time to take advantage of those rates that we can provide to your legal team, and they'll know immediately what to do and how to proceed with those evidence.
Why is your documentation, the way that you would go about it in this reporting moment, better than what I would sort of do on my own within the corporation? What's the differentiation here?
The main differentiation would be that it's admissible as an affidavit or as an exhibit in court. So just that report itself, you wouldn't have to make any changes, or your lawyer can just take that and go straight to the court and it would support your case.
Well, this makes total sense. So I've hired, a private investigator. They've come in, they've done this admissible piece of work. It's created a legal document. But then because you've been in contact with the lawyer already, you kind of know how to support them and support the flow of, building a case in a sense, and you're just an essential piece of that puzzle.
Absolutely. And we work commonly with corporate lawyers very often. So it's common that the client might not even know that they're able to lay criminal charges, but they may want to. And so we'll provide them with those referrals to corporate lawyers locally that they can access to get even more information.
Again, you can hear a team approach. It's not just you lone wolfing it in there. It really is knowing that there's a flow to this. And again, even with the interrogation aspect, there's a respectfulness that's approach that's taken to every given situation as well. So you're helping to guard, the people that are involved, whether they did something or not. You're obviously the people that have hired you, and then all the way through the legal system as well. I just love the thoroughness of it, and it gets us to the final step, step 10, resolution and recommendations. What happens in that step?
So this is the step where we may collaborate with all the departments again to follow up. We may recommend changes such as HR departments, IT regulations, policy changes, and the client may not have that when they started. They may not understand that the outcome of the investigation may change some of their policies and procedures. And if they prefer to have us take that on, which we have lots of experience of doing that in the past, they may prefer having us do that over bringing in another third party to review our entire investigation and then lay out new policies and procedures. We can bring in the individual who's an expert in that industry to review our case, which they have done in the past.
Well, and I love this because I know in the work that I do, consulting wise or leadership development wise, I always say I'm the objective outsider. I'm not in the family. And I think the value of what you're talking about bringing forward is part of what caused the problem in the first place is some sort of weak link might be the way to describe it. But there's something deficient in HR, IT, policies, procedures, something, people, whatever that is. And you, again, you're on that objective outside. You're able to give these sort of recommendations at the end. And so what I can hear for somebody hiring you in a corporate investigation scenario is not that it's going to be necessarily a fixed price at the front end, but because of the fluid nature or the evolution, the full value of really kind of what I would hope would be buttoning up your organization, you're putting these steps in place. So they might need some flexibility in terms of pricing for an engagement. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, and you are correct. Typically, an investigation may have a fixed price, but the total service, when we come in and do the recommendations, that may be an additional cost. And the reason for that is because when we take that approach, it makes much more sense for the professionals involved in the entire situation to take that to its conclusion. We advertise ourselves as the one-stop solution for corporate investigations, and we take that very seriously.
Well, I just think it's just so important because it's funny about when I talk up front, my role is often as Yoda on the shoulder of the leader. And I don't know your business, but I make it my business to know enough about what private investigators do or HR people do or this kind of thing. And I'm always making sure they get warmed up because they get sticker shock around, doesn't matter who they're hiring. They're always like, why does that recruiter cost so much money? Or why does the HR, external consultant or that safety consultant or whoever we're bringing into a given situation? But when we can bring it back to say, this is not a cost, it's actually an investment in your organization. What I've heard you say obviously dovetails so thoroughly into, and we could talk for another hour, I'm sure, about your experience with IT departments, with HR departments, but the value that you're bringing to the situation at a given moment in time would just be, enormous. So are you getting good feedback from the people that you're working with?
Absolutely, and it's as if we commonly get the term "we've been auditing the auditors," and it's common that this doesn't take place, and it's common practice that when your employees who are checking fire extinguishers and things like that are auditing those items, then no one's auditing those reports or people reviewing those reports. And that's what needs to change. As we're moving into new times in 2022, things need to change and procedures change with everyone working from home. So as things develop, we make sure that we stay ahead of the game. We're a part of the Association of Private Investigators in Alberta, which is a subset of the Canadian Association of Private Investigators. And they keep us abreast of all the policies, procedures, technology, and we maintain that in our field to provide our clients with the best solution.
Well, and just, of course, you'd have to keep up because you'd have your base knowledge, but there's always changes. There's always different ways for employees to commit fraud, and you folks are there to sort of guard against that and ultimately drive the profitability of an organization, especially around, IP and those things that would just be so harmful to an organization if they weren't able to access your service to protect them ultimately in the end. super valuable information. I know we're going to go on and on about recommending that people, pick up the article. There's even more in the article talking about different kinds of corporate investigations. You were putting it forward. We're so lucky that you wrote it. And I'm sure that there's going to be people that want to reach out to you directly. And if they had to do that, what's the best way to do it?
Absolutely. It's 587-716-5077.
Super. And the email if they need to send it?
Yeah, it's contact@insightinvestigations.ca. And the investigations is plural if no one heard.
Well, great interview, great article. We're better for it. There's a checklist that, this checklist that we've gone over today. If people want to download that and they've got it there, they can go to insightinvestigations.ca for more information about the other areas that are going on. And now they know they've got someone to talk to when they are suspicious about employee fraud. Zeshaan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gordon, for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that interview as much as I did, especially if you are in a position where you need to learn, about the steps you're going to need to take just in case you're suspicious of some bad activity by employees at your organization. And just to take a moment, I want to recap the 10 steps so we can keep them fresh in your mind and get a bit of a summary as well, for the 10 steps to help you conduct an effective corporate investigation. Step number 1 was to qualify the investigation. This is this idea of a private investigator coming in and saying, do you even need me here? Am I going to be impartial in this situation? Step number 2, plan and prepare for the investigation. And I know Zeshaan talked quite a bit about all the different ways to get ready. Step number 3, gather evidence. And the piece that I really picked up on here was the proper gathering of evidence that private investigators can bring to a given situation. Step number 4, finalize an investigation plan. So you can see all these other steps are leading up to trying to get to finalizing. But as we know, corporate investigations can be pretty fluid. So things can come up later on down the food chain as well. Step number 5, consult with all concerned parties. And what strikes me about Zeshaan's experience here is that he really, is going to think about maybe some of the people that you didn't think about consulting and make sure that everybody gets consulted. Step number 6, interviews and interrogations. If you're getting into that zone, by bringing in a trained private investigator, they're going to be able to do those in the best way possible. Step number 7, evaluate breaches and assess credibility. So again, this is this fine-tooth combing, right, of seeing where the needs are in terms of assessing, are you at the right step in the process? And is the information that you're getting back, is it confirmable? Is it going to be legally admissible? Step number 8, follow-up, right? So again, another sort of backstop to the entire process. Step number 9, and this might be maybe the most important one, that I've come across in, learning from Zeshaan in this situation, and it's reporting. Proper reporting, as in submissible in court. And that's quite remarkable to me to learn in terms of, why a private investigator, why someone like Zeshaan, because the reporting is going to be the best that it can be. And finally, step number 10, you're going to bring it to resolution, and the private investigator is going to give recommendations. And those recommendations could go beyond the engagement that you went through and actually help you to literally tighten up aspects of your operation that you didn't think need to be tightened up, but those recommendations will come at the end of a proper engagement. How rich is this? It'll help anybody in your HR team, anybody in your IT team. Maybe you're the owner, you're a senior leader in the organization. You'll now know very thoroughly how to get ready. Now, this checklist is available on askabusinessexpert.com. If you go to see the article, how can I prevent employee fraud? You can click through there and get, a download of this checklist if you need a printout or a PDF online to, interact with your, your colleagues with. There's also the article. Zeshaan wrote the article there. That's what this is all based on. So please, I hope you check it out. And if you're looking for help beyond private investigation, maybe you're looking for help with sales, maybe you're looking for help with productivity improvement, or perhaps you're even a startup and you're looking for funding, the experts that are on askabusinessexpert.com are there. They are vetted. They're proven at what they do. They're worth, check out their thought leadership in the articles that they write, in the interviews that they give, here on the YouTube channel as well. And really, I hope you get a chance to reach out to them. And if you're looking for someone who can pull it all together, reach out to me directly, right? And, you'll find me through askabusinessexpert.com as well. I'd be happy to talk about the work that I do in terms of coordinating different talented people to come into a situation and really help your organization to be stronger overall. I'll look forward to hearing from you and hope you take advantage of learning how to prevent employee fraud in your organization.